As businesses, we know that we have customers. Sometimes, though, we forget that for at least most of us, we also are customers. That is, customers of our own vendors. If we have issues with items that we purchase from our vendors, just like any customer, we may need to return those items. If it's simply a box of pens or a mouse that didn't work, we might just credit a bank account or credit card. If we need to return inventory items, though, it's not quite that simple. We need to be sure that we keep our inventory and quantity on hand values accurate. In reality, there's a myriad of accounts, transactions, and reports that all could be affected by the return of inventory items to the original vendor. Because of this, there's a specific process for receiving credits from a vendor that are related to the return of inventory products. As a little bit of a review, when we made a purchase, we either received inventory items that came with a bill, or we received the items and the bill came later. We also could have simply written a check for something that we purchased. The bill could have come from a purchase order or a traditional order for which the bill would have been the first document created. If it was all created correctly, either one of these documents should include the item that we purchased as part of the details of the transaction. So, to return an item, we actually create a credit as a bill. Now, I know this sounds a little confusing, but just remember in accounting, things happen in and with accounts, and the only difference is whether it's a credit or a debit. So, if we purchase an item and pay for something with a bill, I suppose it makes sense that we get a refund with a bill as well. It just ends up being a credit and the other a debit. So, let's go ahead and see how this is going to work. Now, of course, we can do this from the navigator. We can do this from a lot of different places, but let's go up to the vendors menu at the top of the screen, and we're going to come down and pretend, just like we said, that we just received items and we're going to enter a bill. First of all, we need to select our vendor. So from our vendor dropdown, we're going to select our AAA Interior Supplies. This prompts us there are still open purchase orders, so we'll say yes, we want to work with the purchase order. We'll place a check mark in the left-hand column and say OK to designate the purchase order from which we want to work. This, of course, shows us the item or items that were part of the purchase order, which is exactly what we want. But we have one more thing to do. If you'll notice in the top left of the bill screen, there's some radio buttons that right now are grayed out. Here's a little trick. We're going to move to the right-hand side and deselect and then reselect the bill received checkbox. This makes these radio buttons available, and now we can change this from a bill to a credit. So what we've done is said we need to create a credit for a specific vendor, the vendor from which the items originally came. And now we simply need to designate how many of the items and which items, if there's more than one, that we're actually getting credit for. So let's say that we're going to return one of these two gang outlets. Because the price is already here, all we have to do is modify the quantity. Now, I do recommend that we also go up and create a memo. What are we doing and why? For example, with this return, maybe it's because one of the outlets was cracked during shipping. Once we get that entered, we can make sure that everything looks right. We can see on the right-hand side that we are getting a credit for $3.28. We can check to make sure we are crediting the proper item. And at the bottom of the screen, we can simply click or tap Save and Close. As usual, QuickBooks will take care of everything it needs to in the background. We know that all of that will occur just like it did when we received items, except this time we'll be returning them and getting credits. Now, technically, there is one more step that we would do to ensure that our bank account or credit card is correct as well. And that is that once our return is processed by the vendor, we would need to process that deposit. We need to put the money back into the proper account or credit card. That's covered in its own topic in our chapter on managing accounts receivable. In the background, though, QuickBooks has done its work. The quantity on hand for the item returned has been adjusted appropriately. And if we were to review the balances owed to the vendor, it would either show a credit or the difference between the balance from other orders and the return we just made. So believe it or not, the process of handling returned inventory items to vendors is just a matter of filling out a bill and designating it as a credit. We like it when things are simple.